The archetype of Hanumanji is being rediscovered by the next generation. What does Hanumanji represent for you?
What I was describing with my childhood, he is a big deal in our culture, right, in our religion. There's a video of Barack Obama, right, where he's holding a little piece of Hanuman, and he's just like, the monkey god, as he described it from Hinduism, that symbolizes strength, that symbolizes overcoming obstacles. That symbolism of his character is something that I've been around for a really long time.
And this brings us to the fact that he's called Kim Purusha. When we say monkey god, Kim Purusha is this combination of a human body with an animal head. So the notable being Ganesha and Narasimha and Hanumanji.
Yeah.
A monkey stands for the mind, right? The monkey mind. It is agitated, cannot be steady. That's the nature of the mind.
When we think about devotion, what is devotion really? In the Gita context, right? Bhakti yoga, right? That finding love, finding devotion, finding our spiritual path through that. And I think Hanuman is a character that embodied that for the entire story.
And then there is the concept of Mukti, which is Moksha in Hinduism. And people are like, oh, no, I'm having a great time. Why would I want that? But don't understand, Mukti is not that your individuality goes away, your importance goes away. You transcend the small you, the lack and limitation. Hello and welcome to the Vid Veda Vedanta podcast. And this is a podcast that invites you to explore the many paths that lead to essential wisdom and inner freedom. And today we have Rahul Deedwania. Rahul is a spiritual seeker that aspires to live life from a place of playful curiosity, soulful connection, and generosity of spirit. His emerging mission is to partner with people to more deeply connect with their inner sense of fulfillment, joy, creativity, and compassion, all the while being inspired to do the same for himself. He currently works in leadership development and organizational design as a consultant, facilitator, and executive coach, and also is a co-host of the Woven Wings Live podcast, which focuses on highlighting wisdom and tools for vibrant living by exploring ancient wisdom, traditions, and modern influences alike. So Rahul, welcome. I'm so happy that we were finally able to, find time to have this conversation, which was long overdue. And given your work and your interest, you're the perfect bridge, as far as I'm concerned, between ancient wisdom and modern aspirations. And recently, just before we were talking, the archetype of Hanumanji is being rediscovered by the next generation of, this pantheon of Hindu gods. But somehow people are connecting with the archetype of Hanumanji. And I am really looking forward to getting, exploring your perspective from your generation, from a place of, you are a nice bridge between corporate and personal, development. So leadership, conscious leadership. How do you see? How aware of you are of Hanumanji? And how do you connect with him? Do you connect with him? And what is your first take on Hanumanji?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me on. And this question and sort of the concept of Hanumanji is something I've been close to for a very long time. I think with my parents, and especially my father's side of the family, Hanuman is the chosen deity, what my mom calls Isht Devta, right? Like your chosen deity has been Hanumanji for my dad's side his entire life, right? They grew up going to a temple that was not too far from where they lived. Every single day, it's a Hanuman temple, right? My dad still, every morning he starts with Hanuman Chalisa, right? And so in that sense, I've been very much around the character of Hanuman and the practice of saying his name and connecting to the energy and essence of Hanuman. And then on my mom's side family, they were very big into the Ramayana, right? And so again, Hanumanji, of course, being a central character. And in that way, I feel like I've seen or been just around the mythology of Hanuman as a deity, as a character, my entire life, right? And I think the associations are of devotion, of strength, of purity, of loyalty, right? These are all qualities that I think I've seen connected to and ascribed to Hanuman from a very young age. And so when I think about the role that he's played for me and for our family, right, that idea of sankat mochan, right, of remover of obstacles, uh, is something that has been present, throughout my entire childhood. And actually, I find myself reconnecting now from a place of renewed curiosity, right? Whereas before it was, I think, soaked in my childhood. Now, I think I'm coming from a place of intellectual curiosity, wanting to learn more, wanting to explore more, and wanting to connect in a deeper way.
Right, right. Yes, because I remember, I mean, I read your article on the four types of, well, I would call it seekers. And, I really liked that. And that's when I really wanted to have this podcast with you because you took an ancient concept and made it so applicable, so relevant to today's, world. So, when I am passionate about demystifying Hindu deities, gods, and I see them as archetypes based on those four classification. Because when you start on your spiritual journey, you are out there. God is a concept out. You're here. God is out there, and somehow, when you're in trouble, you reach out to God, and then comes the
Yeah,
state where you're not in trouble, but you are transacting. He has this power that can give you anything you want. Hey, why would
yeah,
you transact with him? He's the greatest partner in all. And then finally, and not finally, the next stage is when you are really curious to understand what is this power, And finally, you want to become, I mean, not in this mind and body, we cannot become gods, but try to embody what they represent. So what does Hanumanji represent for you? I mean, do you see him only as a god as per Hindu families and social, cultural, religious context, or do you see him as a role model for conscious leadership and personal growth?
it's such a great question because I think I'm in a transition from the first way you described him to the second, right? And so what I was describing with my childhood, I think being around Hanuman as a character, right, was very much like, okay, he is a big deal in our culture, right, in our religion of Hinduism. And I think there was sort of a default connection just at that level, but not that deeper level of really thinking about, well, why, right? What is the importance of Hanuman? Why has Hanuman become, you were mentioning before, among the most popular deities, right? I think there's a video of Barack Obama, right, where he's holding a little piece, a little piece of Hanuman, right? And he's just like, yeah, like this is, the monkey god, as he described it from Hinduism, that symbolizes strength, that symbolizes overcoming obstacles. And he's like, in my moments where, I'm feeling low or feeling overwhelmed, I call on that strength, right? And so I think in that way, that that symbolism of his character is something that I've been around for a really long time. I think where it's been evolving is thinking about when we think about devotion, right? What is devotion really, right? How do we access that sense of devotion or that, in the Gita context, right? Bhakti yoga, right? That finding love, finding devotion, finding our spiritual path through that. And I think Hanuman is a character that embodied that for the entire story, in the Ramayana in which he's a central character, right? That is his purest, most powerful quality in a way, even beyond his strength, right? Is his devotion. And I don't think I really connected with that until more recently. And I was like, oh, I think now, in the last few years, I was like, as I'm finding my own version of bhakti, my own version of devotion, I think of him as a character that really embodied that. And then when you now start to pull these concepts out of the spiritual context into you mentioned leadership, but really into any facet of life, right? I think strength, I think control over your mind, I think devotion, loyalty, these are all qualities that enrich our lives no matter what you're doing. And then if you're a leader, right, and this is something I'm still working on, right, is how do we tie these spiritual ideas to being an effective leader? The more you can tune into these qualities, into these energies, it has a magnifying, a multiplicative effect on the people that you work with, right? There's a magnetism that a leader that's devoted to an ideal, that has conviction behind pursuing that ideal, that mission, the principle, the vision, right, that they're pursuing. When a leader can have that steadfast commitment to what they're trying to do, that has an impact on everybody that they work with. And often leaders that I work with are great at executing, great at project planning, but then they're limited by what they can do, right? And so when we talk about elevating into a place where they're inspiring, where they're magnifying their impact, where they're amplifying what they're trying to achieve, they need to tap into some of these deeper ways of being, these deeper values, right? It's not just being good at executing, but it's having conviction, having devotion, having vision, having loyalty, having consistency. And so that's where I find myself drawing that connection and looking for ways to bring that into even the way that I work with leaders.
Right, right. So Hanumanji is, very well known for Shakti, which is power. Modern world knows very well what that is. There's
Yeah.
You're touching on it, and I don't think the modern world it's moving towards that. It's not something that everybody's jumping at, because bhakti is associated with religious figures, right? I like the way you connected it to a higher ideal. And then there is the concept of mukti, which is moksha in Hinduism. And people are like, oh, no, 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 I'm having a great time. Why would I want that? But don't understand, mukti is not that your individuality goes away, your importance goes away. You transcend the small you, the lack and limitation. I cannot do this, I cannot have that, I cannot be that. So I think from that perspective, he's a great role model. Bhakti, Shakti at the physical level also, not just physical strength, but emotional strength. Bhakti is, devotion to to a higher ideal. And Mukti, he also gives us, whenever we are in trouble, we look to him to help us transcend our lack and limitations, right? But also Hanumanji, I think, is a perfect embodiment, an embodiment of the perfect mind and vitality. And
Mm.
I don't know how much you have researched, but I hope to, instill that curiosity in you. That it's interesting that Hanumanji has three fathers and one mother. If you look at the mythology of the story, and I really am amazed that 15th century Saint Tulsidas was talking about this, and Valmiki created this, because Hanumanji is actually not in our Vedas. He came much later. He's not of the
Mm.
original pantheon of gods. And it was created in Ramayana by Valmiki. And there are some authors who believe that this could be his own life story, because he
Mm.
came from a very untrained and uncultivated mind into devotion, and then the growth that he saw. And this brings us to the fact that he's called Kim Purusha. When we say monkey god, people outside of, I think, Hinduism may not understand, but all these Kim Purusha is this combination of a human body with an animal head. So the notable being Ganesha and Narasimha and Hanumanji.
Yeah.
And the mind, the monkey stands for the mind, right? The monkey mind. It's a very agitated, cannot be steady. That's the nature of the mind. And once we sort of harness it, cultivate it, it gives us a lot of strength. So yeah, to going back to the three fathers and one mother, the mother represents our physical body. And the three fathers represent the three brains that we have. And I don't know if you have read anything about this. The monkey mind represents a reptilian brain, which is basically a survival instinct, animal instinct, which is eats, sleep, procreate, right? Basically. And then
Yeah.
we have the Vayu Putra. He's also seen as the son of the Vayu, which is the mind, and that represents our limbic brain, our emotional brain, the likes and dislikes. When we arise from the animal instinctual living, then we get into thrive state, and we are now in the realm of likes and dislikes. And then he's the son of Lord Shiva, right? And he becomes the neocortex, the most recent brain, which can transcend the being trapped by the likes and dislikes. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I love where this is going because the monkey mind, is a concept that I've been seeing really grow in prominence, even in a lot of self-help type circles, in leadership development and habit formation, right? It's constantly referred to as this thing of like, hey, the monkey mind is what keeps you from being quote unquote in control of your life, right? What you were calling the neocortex way of looking at it, where you've stepped away from emotional reactivity. You have a moment to consider and to choose how you want to be, what values you want to live by in any given moment, right? And I think this idea of the monkey mind, I've been surprised at how prevalent it is, and I think I've most often seen it ascribed to Buddhism, right? Where it's a concept in Buddhism that's again quite prominent. And I remember first being introduced to it when learning about procrastination, right? Procrastination, which is something that everyone can relate to as something that at some point or the other we procrastinated on something, right? And that's something we see, again, ubiquitously with anybody. And again, tying it back to leadership, certainly with leaders as well. And it's like, what is happening in that moment of procrastination? I think more and more I've come to believe that it's a moment in which we are emotionally dysregulated, right? Where something has created stress or anxiety or something has taken us away from operating from our neocortex and has moved us closer to that reptilian place where we're no longer choosing how we want to act. It's actually just a automated response, right? So if we're in a stressful situation of any kind, and we want to escape it, right? Because our reptilian brain has that response, right? Either when we're in fear, we want to run away, we want to attack, we want to become small, right? And that's something I can relate to a lot, or I've noticed for myself that's what happened. My response is flight, right? When you think about the four F's, right? Flight or fight is the most common, but also fawn or I'm forgetting the fourth one right now. And it's for me, I find that I take flight. That's my reptilian brain, my monkey mind, as we call it, taking over and taking me out of where I want to be. And so I think in that sense, I'd actually never drawn that connection to Hanuman prior to when we spoke. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? That this is a character that has sort of achieved control over that part of the mind and is able to then focus on devotion, is able to then channel the strength or the Shakti that we're talking about because the character is no longer subservient to the monkey mind. So that's what I find coming up as you share that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is I get blown away that this is psychological concepts and physiological concept we're talking about. And so many centuries ago, somebody could identify it's not just the reptilian brain and the neocortex, which is a reptilian being the instinctual, the reactionary brain, versus the calm step back observer witness consciousness. In between is the limbic brain, which is like
Yeah.
are emotional. And that whole thing gets so beautifully woven into the story of Hanumanji. He's of course known for so many heroic, valiant things that he did in Ramayana, but the jump across the ocean, and the ocean being it's called in Sanskrit Bhava Sagara. Bhava is emotion. How to bypass it That most people, when they talk about freedom, they say freedom, I like this, I must have this, I don't like that, I won't. But we become entrapped by our likes and dislikes. And
Yeah.
there comes a time when our likes and dislikes hold us back. It doesn't let us expand. For instance, I like food and I've got diabetes, but I'm unable to drop the sweet. I like a
Yeah.
but I have become addicted to some sort of a substance abuse, and I'm not able to walk away from it. At that point, the likes and dislikes are not serving you. So, how to jump that? Enjoy life, but first recognize when your likes or dislikes are not serving you. But recognition is not the only thing. You need to be able to overcome that. And that's the problem of the limbic brain. So when you come out of animal existence, of course, we want art, culture, food, fun, but at some point we should be able to overcome that as well and go to the
Yeah.
towards the neocortex, and this ties in beautifully to Maslow's pyramid of self-actualization as well, right? First you have
Yeah.
physiological needs, safety needs, emotional needs, and then there is always within the human this always looking for something bigger, better, because we cannot be satisfied until we are immortal, we know everything, and we are constantly in a state of bliss, because that is our basic nature. And until you get there, you're not going to stop. So I think
Yeah.
he gives a wonderful is a wonderful archetype to work with, to understand that here you have the body and you have these brains, and there's a folklore. I mean, there's a story associated with it that Hanumanji, of course, whoever calls out to him, he is available. He's always there, but his two weaknesses are Lord Ram and his mother Anjani. And if you think about it, Hanumanji is the mind and the breath. And naturally, when the body needs it, the mind and body will be available. I mean, tomorrow, if you're hungry or you are in trouble, your mind and breath will come to serve your body. It has to. And also,
Yeah.
that spiritual, like I said, always aiming higher ideal. That's where the Lord Ram comes. If your soul calls, the mind and breath has to answer that call. There's no turning
Yeah.
away from. So naturally he will answer the calls of your nature, your body, and the calls of your soul. So these are the two things that he is attached to. But and also, but I also want to hear from you. In today's world, power is everything, power and force.
Mm.
And Hanumanji he doesn't take credit. He's an, egoless power. How does that connect with modern world where we want aggressive and power, where we want, what is in it for us? Where Hanumanji never asks. He always says, how can I serve you, to his Lord? He never says, what is in it for me? And how does that part of Hanumanji, how do you relate it to, would modern people would benefit from that? Would they even connect with it? That aspect of Hanumanji.
Yeah. I think my emerging thinking on that, right, is, as you said, power, as we think about it most often in society, is very aggressive, right? And with aggressiveness, it's also oppressive, right? It creates a hierarchy. It's not coming from a place of service or using power for service, but rather it's power for control, right? For domination, for oppression. And I think what we're seeing, in a way, is that version of power in some ways is having a resurgence right now. But equally, alongside of that resurgence of that power, I think the opposite of that, the reaction to that, is also that, hey, like, this form of power is not sustainable because it's not generative, right? This form being the aggressive one. The oppressive one, if you think about it in my mind, tying back to the mythology, it's the Rakshas, right? It's the tyrant, which is actually destroying rather than creating. And I think what's happening slowly, and what I hope happens over time, is that the backlash to that aggressive power grows enough, the reaction to it grows enough, that that aggressive form of power, or the sort of the way that that power is idealized by so many parts of our society and so many sort of the philosophy underlying our society, that idealization starts to come down, right? And that as consciousness develops, a recognition that selfless power and power in service is actually the power that's generative, it's multiplicative, right? And that when power is exercised or expressed from that place, it actually lifts, it elevates rather than brings down or destroys. And as we as a people, as a society, I think come closer and closer and closer to sort of this existential threat of ourselves, right? Where we're bringing, we're not living in a way that's going to last, right? I think hopefully that shift is something that will come, right? And
Yeah.
it's certainly a shift that I hope to be a part of myself.
Yeah. No, and also I think, like you said, it beautifully ties into Richard Dawkins' Power versus Force book, and force is something that it external, it is aggressive, it is something you're pushing, and it creates agitation not just inside you but around you. Whereas power is eternal, is internal, and it creates peace from which you can actually create a lot more when you're not agitated. All of your mental faculties and cognition and emotional strength is available to you to create peace and development and growth for you and people around you. So I think
Yeah.
plays into his Hanumanji's character. And going back a little bit towards that jump across the ocean, because that's what he was known for. And before Hanumanji met Lord Ram, his ideal, he had strength, but there's no notable achievements. But when
Mm,
connect with our higher ideal, all his accomplishments come after that. Before that,
yeah.
he was just there. I mean, and so this jump across the ocean in spiritual terms is a seeker's journey as well, because Lanka is our subconscious, which is there but out of sight, and we can't find it, and it's very difficult. And you really have to be willing to dive deep into the ocean, which is not dive, but we dive, but he was able to overcome it or fly
Yeah.
over it to find the demons that are inside us, right? And in the process, you have to meet and address the demons that are inside you. And this case, notably, there are four demons in when Hanumanji crosses. One is Mainaka, which is basically well-intentioned but ill-informed friends and relatives who stop you from when you want to do something which is unheard of. Nobody has ever done it, and they are afraid, and they say, is this the time? I mean, are you sure? Why would you do this? This is not for you. You're quoting risk. That's one form of a demon. Then comes the surasa, where you want to do something, either you want to start a company or something not established by your or not experienced by your current community, your duties and obligations, like if you want to go on a spiritual path or give up a very cushy job to start be an entrepreneur, because you're risking. So the surasa would be the you're a father, you're a mother, you have children, you have parents, you have obligations, you have duties. Are you sure you're ready for this? And then comes the Simhika, which is when Hanumanji was flying across, there was this, he just felt being pulled down by a force he didn't even recognize. And these are the self-sabotaging behaviors. Sometimes we are able to overcome our well-meaning, well-meaning and ill-informed relatives. We are able to make peace with our obligations and duties, but sometimes our self-sabotaging doubts doesn't let us do it, right? So these three demons, and finally when he lands on Lanka, when we take the time to reflect and contemplate the final barrier, and every spiritual tradition, whether it is Buddha where he met Mara, you're doing contemplation, but the final veil, and
Yeah.
Lankini, that it wants to check, are you ready for this? And then many obstacles will come, but if you persist, she gave way very quickly. So I see beautiful, correlations between our spiritual journey, even our, material physical journey. Does that sort of appeal to you? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, very much so, very much so. And I think you just so beautifully tied the characters. And as you were listing each of the four, obstacles, right? It was immediately, I was like, oh, it's so evocative and so relatable,
Right.
right? These aren't mystical foreign concepts, to your point. In our day-to-day
Yeah.
material existence, we experience this. And I think what I'm as I'm drawing a thread through what we're talking about, right? I think what we're saying is the power that we're talking about that we all hold, right? In order to unlock that, we need to connect with this deeper energy, right? Whether it's soul or divine energy, if we're coming from using spiritual language or using leadership language, right? It's mission, it's vision, using personal kind of life, it's fulfillment, it's values, right? Whatever it is, the more we can tune into that essence, it gives us strength. And I'm sort of picturing this this generative circle where the more we can connect with that strength, the more we're able to face these four different obstacles that you named, right? We're able to relate to them in a way where they're not taking us away from that journey, from our mission, from our path, from our development, but rather we're able to see them for what they are and continue, in the path that we're meant to be on.
Yes, and it can relate to any area of endeavor, whether it is an entrepreneurship or a spiritual journey, or even for me, I tie everything to my weight loss journey forever and ever. When you start, people around you will say, oh, this is not the time. Oh, come on, this one time you can eat it. That is the manaka.
Yeah, yeah,
And you want to cook only healthy food for yourself, but you have obligations. Your family eats everything. How do you manage that? Versus, my duties and obligations, so I should be cooking Indian food for everybody all the time, and so I'm unable to take care of myself. And then
yeah.
becomes you take care of all of that, but somehow you just self-sabotage. I mean, and you don't know why, because there is a deep, you have to emotionally then figure out, why am I sabotaging my journey? I want this, I put so much effort into this. So it really ties into many areas at different levels.
and,
And
and going there, I mean, to what you said, like really facing these demons is hard,
yes.
right? It's very hard, and it really requires that strength. And when we talk about Shakti, it's not strength just to overcome, it's strength even to face, to acknowledge, to admit that these demons are there.
And also, tied to that, because that is his most revered accomplishment, Hanumanji's. Many of us face this, whatever we want between us and our desire is this unfathomable ocean. And we figure, how am I ever going to get to that other side? And then comes Jambavan, this character, this bear, very ancient, he's thousands of years old, who reminds him of his power, that you have this, you can do it. And we have people around us, either it is coaches, mentors, gurus, or even scriptures that remind us there is a power. If there is a will, there is a way, and you're never given a dream without also being given the power to make it come true, the resources to make it come true. So we must trust
Yeah.
that when somebody comes and tells you that you're capable of it, instead of doubting, and then who can jump that ocean? Just because Hanumanji does it and he seems like a great model, we can't. What made him do that was the fact that he was a brahmachari. And this is where I want your opinion, because I mean your view, because brahmachari is commonly known as, celibacy. And then can you imagine today's world? I mean, are you kidding me? But to that, I always say that look at how popular intermittent fasting has become. And it's a fairly recent phenomenon, last 10 years, 15
Yeah.
perhaps. But in any religious tradition, fasting was always there for health purposes. Any
Yeah.
religion. And so also this concept of brahmacharya, we think it is, again, this limbic brain. What I want is what I want. But brahmacharya means it's not celibacy, but it is austerity, control over your likes and dislikes, especially in 4 areas. In the Puranas, it says, Ahara, Vihara, Maithuna, Nidra. You must have control over what you eat. You must have control over your entertainment, how you entertain yourself, how much time you spend on scrolling on social media or alcohol or food or whatever. Ahara, Maithuna, your sexual activities as well as your sleep. These 4 areas create energy and drain energy. And that's why Hanumanji is covered in orange. Orange being the second chakra. There are 7 energy centers, and the second one is our sexuality and sensuality. And in Ayurveda, I don't know if you're aware, in any of your research, if you came across, when we consume food, the tissue nourishment happens in 7 phases. Immediately when you eat it, you don't get the vitality. So it goes
Yeah.
through the plasma, it goes through the blood, then and it's successive, hierarchical, from plasma to blood, blood to muscle, from muscle to bones, bones to bone marrow, from bone marrow to your reproductive fluid, and then it is available as ojas, as energy, as vitality, as life force. So this is our reproductive fluid is a very expensive energy. We can create a baby with it, have sensual pleasure, or as you see, very many spiritual seekers wear orange to remind them you can bring that vitality inside and go within, and a whole new world opens up for you.
Mm.
So that is something I think in the next decade or two, brahmacharya is going to be as popular as intermittent fasting. Right now, the modern world is not familiar with the power of brahmacharya. That doesn't mean that you do not enjoy life, but you restrict it to, as long as it's in my control, it's giving me joy, I'll do it. When it starts destroying me, starts restricting me, I must have the ability to say enough, and that's it. So, what are your thoughts on that, on brahmacharya and Hanumanji?
No, I really appreciate that breakdown. I haven't heard it described that way, so I'm finding, just that very interesting and very powerful and simple. That hey, like this is what it means. It means control. It means you mentioned austerity, right, over these areas. And immediately where I was going, actually, as you were describing all this, is I was like, people sort of know, right? Like what does it mean to eat in a way that's healthy? What does it mean to have entertainment in moderation, right? What does it mean to engage in sexual activity in a pure way versus one that's again that's draining?
Indiscriminate.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and sleep, right? Sleep has gone through waves in terms of the way people consider it to be important or not important. The current wave is is really prioritizing sleep, right? As I've been hearing even from younger founders and people running companies that they're like, oh yeah, like the new way of thinking is that sleep matters, right? 15 years ago, it was work 120 hours. That's the only way you're going to succeed. Now it's, hey, sleep more so you can make better decisions. And what's interesting is where I was going with all this is like, it just took me back to your description of the limbic mind, right? Where I think the ability to moderate our likes and dislikes, right? To not be slave to our likes, right? To be, the current thinking for me has really been around like how much of our lives are driven by seeking dopamine hits, right? And that comes in the form of food, it comes in the form of entertainment, it comes in the form of sexual activity or masturbation. It comes in the form of denying ourselves sleep and staying on our screens, right? All of these are these sort of the opposite of nourishing, right? These destructive cycles that many people are aware of, but they're not able to jump across the ocean, right?
Yes.
And I think as we also get more disconnected from people, right, as technology forms this layer between us and people, that strength, that reason, that motivation to jump the ocean, to jump the chasm, and to step out of being subservient to our likes and dislikes and our whims has I feel like been coming down, right?
Yes.
And that's the the present crisis that I think we're working on trying to figure out how to navigate.
Yeah, that the emotional regulation is lacking in, the previous societies, there were too much strict control, and the modern one, therapists and psychologists says there's not enough regulation of emotion. We've become so fragile emotionally that everybody is walking around eggshells around us because we cannot
Yeah.
any extreme emotions, right? So that
Yeah.
emotional regulation is necessary before you can activate your neocortex, which is the intellectual brain. If you cannot go beyond your likes and dislikes, and that is what sets humans apart from the animals and even the gods, because in Vedanta, what we are told is that the animals are instinctual. They have no choice. There's no regulation there. A tiger cannot eat grass and an elephant cannot eat meat. That's why that's who it is. And the gods also have no choice. If you are worshipping Lakshmi, she has to give you wealth. She cannot give you knowledge. They don't have a choice. But human beings have all the choice, whether you
Yeah.
drop down to your animal instinct or activate your divine qualities within you. So that
Yeah.
jumping the ocean has holds so many layers of aspects of personal growth. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was a very important thing that I wanted to. And Hanumanji, he is, I think, the only god in Hindu pantheon, if I can see, where undefeated, invincible. But do you see any, or have you heard of any flaws that Hanumanji has?
I actually wanted to ask you that question because I was thinking about it before, and I think it's interesting. Like even um, you take a number of these deities in Hindu mythology, right? And it's like Ram is meant to be purity, the ideal king, right? And Krishna is sort of the divine being, and you have all these different characters. And I was like, with Hanuman, in the story as I've seen it, he is the perfect um, companion, perfect loyal messenger, perfect embodiment of strength and service. And I was thinking a lot on this. I was like, does he exhibit or show any flaw, any moment in which he deviates from his path? And I couldn't think of it. I couldn't, I don't know of one, but I'm curious if you know
No,
of
so
anything.
so what my research has shown me is that, again, Hanumanji represents us when we are the monkey mind before we meet Lord Ram, which is a
Mm,
ideal that we can be devoted to, and after there's no flaws. Before, I won't even call it flaws. They are mostly initiatory challenges, is what I was
mm,
came up with. Because
yeah,
think about what are the two things that he's known for before he met Lord Ram, is that him swallowing the sun. Now, the swallowing the
right.
sun is rashness in youth. When he was a child,
Yeah,
unbridled, untamed ambition. You want to eat the sun, and we don't realize when we grapple. I want it. I want you wanting or me wanting something is not enough. What impact it has on the rest of the world?
yeah,
Something what sun stands for. So that is not so much a flaw, but like rashness in youth. Before you have emotional maturity, you want what you want, and you trample over everything else, irrespective of what havoc you create around you. But
yeah, yeah,
right, and the other one is forgetfulness of our power. We are extremely powerful beings. We create our own reality, but our mind is our greatest strength, and an untrained and uncultivated mind is our worst enemy. So Hanumanji also had that forget. He didn't realize his power until he was reminded by Jambavan. So each of us have those problems as well. We have unbridled, untamed ambition, and we create havoc, and then we don't know our real powers until somebody reminds us, whether that is a coach or a mentor or a guru, it doesn't matter. Then you realize
yeah.
you're capable of. So I won't call it flaws, but not like I said, initiatory challenges before we
That's such a good way to frame it, and I think what you were saying about the mind, right? It's another concept from the Gita that I've thought about a lot since reconnecting with it a couple of years ago. It's like in the Gita they talk a lot about how the mind is such a powerful instrument, And when left to its own devices and not controlled or not under, the context of our spiritual selves, the mind is our worst enemy, right? It takes us down the wrong path, what we've been talking about with the monkey mind. And on the other hand, when we are able to channel it, it is one of our greatest allies. And I
Yeah.
think that way of describing, initiatory is such a great word, because I think in a way we are all initiating ourselves, right? And at various paths of initiation, or various stages of initiation, I should say, where, for myself, I can say, like, I see a path in front of me where some of these same challenges we're talking about, are very present in my life. Some of these obstacles that we've named, I'm like, yeah, I don't know that I'm able to just fly on by, right? I think I'll stop, I'll indulge, I get distracted, right? And so that's, I think, part of the initiation as well. And that's such a great way to frame it. One of the things I'm curious to hear from you is, how have you brought, the Hanuman archetype and all of these different concepts that come out of the mythology into your own life? What does that application look like for you?
Yeah, that's I'm glad you asked. I love to talk about this.
Yeah.
So in the Vedas, a four-step process is given to have to connect with an archetype, with a role model. And like we started off our conversation with the Ishta Devata, there's this pantheon of gods in Hindu philosophy, but as we know, when you delve deeper, there's only one energy that has so many different expressions. And depending on our particular temperament and stage in life, we connect with a particular form of that ultimate energy. So if you're looking for wealth and abundance, it would be Lakshmi. If you're looking for sustaining something, creating something, Lord Vishnu. If you want to dissolve some level of negativity, it's Shiva. And for me, Hanumanji from childhood, even though he's not our Ishta Devata, either in my father's side or my in-laws side, he was my Ishta Devata. And the beauty
Mm,
about this is, when you have an Ishta Devata, he or it is a portal to the whole. It's just the door. Once you step in, it's a whole different world. And the way we do this four steps that is recommended or mentioned in the Vedas is, first is called Salokyam. Loka is in the same dimension. Be in the presence of that role model. So how would you be in the presence of the role model? You go to the temple, you read books about it. You are basically going to the temple and looking at it. You're in the same plane. Then it's called Samipyam. Get closer to it, him. In this case, Hanumanji, him. Meaning, learn about Hanumanji. What does he stand for? Who is he? What defines him? Then comes the Sarupyam. Try to imitate him, fake it to make it. So when
yeah.
you're faced with a challenge, what would Hanumanji do? So you start imbibing and doing things that you think Hanumanji would do. And finally, called Sayujyam. Yuj is unite. You become him in that process. Of course, this is, in the context that we are not going to become Hanumanji in this lifetime, but role model. So it
Yeah.
four stages. First is you come to his presence, whatever role model you're working with. Learn about that role model. Try to imitate the role model and then become the role model to the best of your ability. Right. So for me, Hanumanji, for whatever reason, in fifth grade, I wanted to chant 108 times Hanuman Chalisa. It took me 7 hours and everybody thought I was mad, but I
Yeah,
obviously.
I was gonna ask, like, what was that moment where you felt this connection to
Right.
him, and what, yeah.
And the more I delve deep into the archetype, the role model of Hanumanji, I realize that they never come alone. They bring any archetype you take, they come with a whole host of other characters. In this case, I realized that Hanumanji, Ram, Sita, Lakshman, these are not different things. They're all inside me. Ram is my essential spirit and soul. Sita is
Mm,
my embodied body. She was found from the field, for crying out loud.
yeah.
Lakshmana is my intellect, and Hanumanji is a trained and perfected mind and a breath under perfect control that gives me vitality, access to vitality. So, and of course, there are many other characters, but every time I sit down, I call in, I know that my breath, my body, my mind, my intellect is here to serve my soul, my source, which is Lord Ram. And how
Yeah.
will I do it? I will do it with my intellect and with my breath. And I am Sita. I, as in not just the feminine, all of us are the embodied. And when does Sita get abducted? When, for even for a fraction of a second, if you get disconnected from your soul and look at the razzle dazzle of the world, the golden deer, your ego will whisk you away into the world. And before you know it, you fall into a world of dualities and pain and suffering. But you can come back using your intellect, Lakshmana,
Yeah.
your breath, and your mind. If you control these three things, you'll be right back united with your source and soul and spirit. So I use Hanumanji as the portal to access all these other characters inside me.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Yeah. I find myself right now just feeling, inspired. And I think with where I'm at in my own journey, sort of seeking, you mentioned the four pieces, right? And I think where I'm at in a way is I think choosing who to get closer to, and I think as part of that, one of the thoughts that's been occurring to me is like, hey, there is this character in Hanumanji that's connected to my family, it's connected to our history, that is available to me. It's such a, and right now I'm feeling my curiosity even more activated to be like, oh, let me go deeper. Yeah.
In Hinduism, we go through this God. It's not a person out there. I explain it as 1, 2, and 3. There's only one power that splits into the masculine and the feminine. To create anything, you have to have a masculine energy and a feminine energy, potential energy, kinetic energy. They will create a world which has to be created, sustained, and dissolved. So comes the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. So, but in the Hindu philosophy or the Vedanta, there are three main sources, and these are Shiva, Vishnu, and Devi. Shiva refers to our intellect, Vishnu refers to our heart, and Devi refers to our body. You can take any one of them and you'll have access to all three. But your starting point has to be any one of these, right? And so even in the Hanuman thing, Hanumanji is a representation, embodiment, or a avatar of Shiva. Sita is the Devi. Ram is Vishnu. So they will always come together. You can't
Yeah.
not get access to the others. So any
Yeah.
model you take, and that depends on our personal preference, tendencies, but each one of them will give you access to all of them.
Yeah. 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 And I think this idea, right, of, I've heard it referred to as like the three intelligence centers, right, of mind, body, heart, or soul. That is, vernacular that is entered into conversation around personal development, around, coaching, even as separate from religion and spirituality. I'm hearing that being talked about, right? And I think a lot of the dialogue I hear is like, hey, we've been so mind oriented as a society. What would it look like if we were to connect more deeply with our hearts and our soul? And what would it look like for us to connect more deeply with our body, right? Because we live so in such a disembodied way. But what I love about your saying is the underlying truth also is that they're all connected, right?
You
And
cannot have one without the other two. I mean, can you
yeah,
imagine the body without the mind and intellect? Can you imagine the intellect without body and mind? I mean, and that's why one important thing I think it might interest you is: are you familiar with the churning of the Milky Ocean in the Hindu mythology? Because it's a beautiful metaphor, allegory for the introspection and reflection which all of us have to do if you want to rise. And the entire again reference to the ocean, because the ocean is our emotion, the bhavasagara. Unless you churn it, you won't get anything. And when you churn it, you churn with the devas and asuras, with your sapient tendencies and your lower tendencies. They have to come together. You cannot fragment yourself, suppress, or throw, push away anything. They all have to come together. And the first thing that comes out is poison. When we start any therapy, first thing that comes is poison. You're blaming everybody but yourself.
Yeah.
And everything was prepared and strategized by Vishnu. But when the poison comes, who should be called? Shiva. Why? Vishnu is equally powerful. Why would you call Shiva? Now, here you have to understand why they work together. Vishnu stands for the heart, the emotion. He's always lying in the ocean. Ocean is your emotions. Now,
Yeah.
if this poison of hatred, resentment, anxiety comes into the heart, what is the role of the heart? Spread it everywhere. But Shiva is sitting far away from the madding crowd on top of a mountain, which is your intellect, not
Yeah.
concerned with your emotions. So it has to swoop down and do a cognitive reframing. And then he leaves and says, you take care of it, I'm gone. So
Yeah.
we need to use our heart where it is needed, our body where it is needed, our intellect where it's needed. So they cannot be separately worshipped. You need all of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that integration, right? I think developing that integration, knowing when to channel which one, right? That is the practice, right? That is what we develop. And once you do, right, I think it's immensely powerful and liberating to be able to channel each of those in different ways.
Right. So, my final question to you would be, what would be your final takeaway I mean, I hope that you have learned something different, little new. And did you learn anything new that you did not know before? And how will that change your perception of the world and of personal growth in the space of personal growth?
I mean, first off, I learned many new things. So I think I want to start by saying that, and won't even be able to enumerate all of them, as part of this closing. But I think what's coming up for me right now is there's some familiar ideas that I'm feeling myself deepening my connection to, and then some new ideas, that are all sort of coming together, and I sort of need to just sit with all of it. But the familiar ideas, one of the themes we were talking about earlier, right, which is that connecting to something bigger, some ideal, something bigger, greater, deeper than ourselves, is where we can find inspiration, right? And the more we can be in service to that, right, the more we'll be in connection with our own power, right, our more agency. And then the piece that I really enjoyed is that how do we develop maturity in our ability to channel that power in a way that's constructive, generative, productive, whatever it might be. And I think a reminder that you had of, hey, prior to Hanuman connecting with the higher ideal or the purity and the divine essence of Ram, that power was sort of misdirected and not in his control, and therefore not in service to something that we might want to pursue. And so I think that's an idea that's like really stuck with me. And then I think also really thinking about those obstacles, right? That, hey, as we're trying to cross not just, one body of water, jump the ocean once, we have to do that time and time and time and time again, right? And each frontier is a new one as we deepen in our understanding of selves, as we deepen in our spiritual path, as we deepen in our sort of our connection with our deepest essence. And in order to do that, we have to be mindful that those distractions, those obstacles are going to continue to arise, right? And that concept is present in so many places. I was also thinking when you were describing that of Homer's Odyssey, right? And the sirens. And it's like, hey, I'm trying to get over there, but there are these sirens that are pulling me over there. And it's like, how do we stay committed to getting to where we are? And those are some of the thoughts among many that I'm thinking about right now.
And one final comment before we And today's podcast is, before we started, you and I talked about this pop culture. You said that, you
Oh
want,
yeah.
yeah. So just briefly, I mean, I don't know much about pop culture, unfortunately, but you said that there's some movies or you know, uh,
Yeah, there are two things. So one, I mean, I mentioned Barack Obama. I mean, that's not pop culture, but just to see like this Black American president of the US connecting with this character, with this symbol, is already such a like, wow, like, look at where Hanuman has gotten. But the two that I think came to mind when we were talking about this topic, one is this movie called Monkey Man, right? And it's a in a way it's an action thriller, but really it's a story of the main character finding his purpose, finding his pursuit, developing his strength, and then channeling it against the forces of evil that were present in his world. And I think it was and the symbol, so there's that journey that we've talked about related to Hanuman already. And then the symbol, he starts out in these wrestling pits and he would put on a monkey mask and he became known as the Monkey Man, right? But it was a very clear, explicit connection back to Hanuman as a character. And the entire story was a sort of a modern rendition. And this movie was quite popular, actually, and at least I can say for our generation, because it was, the other pop culture references. There's this rapper, he was born in India but raised, I think, in Texas, who has called himself Hanuman Kind, right? That is his moniker, and he's talked about like why he chose that name, right? And he's like, oh, Hanuman is this symbol of loyalty, of courage, of strength that I want to call upon, and it's a connection back to my heritage. And the kind is actually for mankind. And so he's like, oh, I'm not going to be mankind, but Hanuman kind. And it's just interesting to see this his name come up in these very different contexts.
yes, yes. And I'm glad that that's coming up for the modern generation to even start to connect with this concept. My only thing is I've not seen this movie nor heard the music of this Hanuman kind. But what we have to be careful about is Hanuman is, most people connect in the beginning with his power, with his accomplishment,
Yeah,
with even to a certain extent loyalty, but he was the epitome of culture. Epitome. So I cannot imagine rap culture where language is not necessarily culture. Just the nature of the art. And because when Hanumanji first met Ram, even though it was in the forest and he was a monkey, the way he addressed himself and the way he asked for information about Lord Ram, he was the finest diplomat. Never. He accomplished everything without one cuss word ever, even though he is a monkey. So be careful to study more. And there was never any rage, never, from complete.
yeah,
It's like in Bhagavad Gita, it says, chapter 2, I think, verse 66, that to the unsteady mind, there is no meditation. To the unmeditative mind, there is no peace. And to the peaceless mind, how can there be any happiness? So, keeping in mind that peace and clarity and culture and devotion define him. So, it's not just power, not just accomplishments, but how, not what you achieve, but how you achieve it, is the hallmark of Hanumanji. That you cannot
yeah,
find, like we said, find it so difficult to find his flaws because
yeah, yeah.
and then even though we may not be perfect, but we must keep in mind that that's the archetype we're working with.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really good point because I do think, even for me, right, I'll say that my hierarchy of associations with his character, it starts with strength and devotion, right?
Yes.
I think that's how I'll say that's how he's been marketed, right? But there's so much more to it, like you said, and that essence, I think, is part of the study, right, of this character.
And one my favorite of, because why he is my chosen Ishta Devata is that because today's world is run by ego. I mean, whatever you
Yeah,
say, and overachievement, over accomplishment. And I find myself experiencing, how to make myself relevant and stay relevant and be acknowledged and be appreciated and what have you. But that story about Hanumanji, whenever I feel overwhelmed by pride or arrogance or whatever it is, that when whole Ramayana was finished, he had his own story of Ramayana he'd written. And then when Valmiki finds out, Sage Valmiki, who wrote Ramayana, he starts crying. And Hanumanji say, why do you cry? He says, because who's going to read my story if they read your autobiography? He says, is that all? And he threw his book into the ocean. And today, thousands of years later, who is more better known, Hanumanji or Valmiki, right? Who has become the deity? So I keep that as my goal, that, when ego tries to consume me, the one who gave it up has been elevated to a god. And the Valmiki is well known, but he's not a god. So I would like
Yeah.
to end the podcast with that message to our audience. And thank you, Rahul, for making the time. I know you're very busy, and I truly appreciate you coming in and wanting to learn more and giving your perspective from a personal growth space.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a privilege for me, and really appreciate your thinking of me for this.
Thank you.